Today, let's talk about how to study full time. This is something I get asked about all the time. I think there's a lot of bad advice out there, and I want to cut through the noise and help you make the most of the time that you have. For some of you, you've got a break from work, or you're available enough on weekends that your weekend study time is essentially full time study. As you might imagine, I work with a lot of people every year who are not able to study full time, and that has its own challenges. And if that's you, I recommend our How to Study with Limited Time episode, which is from March 8th of 2024 and is going to be linked in the description of this content. But if you do have a full available day or many full available days, here's what I recommend. Number one, I recommend studying in 2 hour blocks. There's an important caveat with all of this. If what you're doing is working and you're the type of person who honestly gets the best results by studying 8 hours straight with no breaks, then that's awesome. By all means, please continue. If it isn't broken, don't fix it. But that is, I would estimate, less than 1% of people. And it's definitely less than 1% of people in my experience, which is extensive at this point with the GMAT. The vast, vast majority of people do better with a limited time horizon that forces them to focus only on what's critically important and then take a solid break. In fact, you may have noticed that on days where you have the most available time, you might end up feeling the least productive. If that's you, then you definitely want to be using this 2 hour blocks approach. Now, you can experiment with doing a bit less or a bit more. Maybe your personal optimal zone is 3 hours, but for 85% of people that I've worked with or observed online, 2 hours is about where you're going to experience that diminishing return, as it were. I'll give some advice later on how to actually structure what you're doing within those 2 hour blocks. But for now, I just want to keep things really focused on the big picture and time management specifically, because it's kind of easy to get bogged down in the details with this topic. So, recommendation number one, study in 2 hour blocks. Recommendation number two, between each 2 hour block, take at least a 1 hour break. During your break, I recommend getting away from the desk, getting outside if possible, running errands, cleaning the house, maybe get a workout in, and maybe even consider meeting up with some friends or some colleagues, maybe digitally, but ideally in real life. The idea is to be in a totally different state of mind versus when you're studying. Plenty of research supports that it's during these times when you're focused on something else that your brain actually consolidates most of what you are exposing yourself to when you're studying. Think about it like a physical workout. You don't get stronger while you're working out. You stress your body during the workout, and then during your other time, especially recover time, is when your body adapts. And your brain works basically the same way. So let's capitalize on that rather than trying to work against it. This also has a good dual effect of allowing you to take care of other responsibilities and still have fun once in a while, even though you'll be logging a lot of hours on GMAT prep. So I recommend studying in 2 hour blocks and taking at least a 1 hour break between those 2 hour study blocks. I think you'll find that is a really, really good balance of intensity and recovery. Recommendation number three, make regular exercise non-negotiable. This is something I've talked about a lot in the past because if you're not exercising on a regular basis, then every one of your study hours is between 50 and 80% as effective as it could be. That's a major, major drop off. So ask yourself, do you want this to take twice as long? If not, then I strongly recommend exercising every day. When you exercise, it optimizes your brain chemistry and structure for learning. If you're interested in the mechanics of this, by all means, please look it up. If you have resistance to it, though, just think about exercise as study time. Think about exercise as study time. It's more than okay to give up 20 minutes of study time to do something that makes the other 8 hours of study that day twice as effective. If that math doesn't make sense to you, then it's a good thing you're going to business school because they will surely help you sort out the ROI calculation on that, and you'll get really great at ROI calculations in general. Just to be clear, and I've talked about this a bunch in the past, but I feel it's worth reiterating. You don't need to be a professional athlete with your exercise routine here. You don't need to be breaking personal records with your fitness. That's all great if that is you and it's authentic to you. But it's definitely not required. You just need to find something that works for you that's sustainable. Couple thoughts on this. Don't judge yourself. Focus on what works for you. If it's a YouTube bodyweight training session at home, great, do that. If it's a guided class, great, do that. If it's a brisk walk, get some fresh air, great. The point is to establish a routine that you can stick to long term. If you can't engage the routine every day, then it's the wrong routine for you, okay? So you might have to go through some optimization with this. You might have to try a few things, iterate a little bit, experiment, but I promise you it is more than worth it when it comes to efficacy and efficiency with your study time. Um, Also, side note, you don't need to do the same activity every single day. Maybe you take a class Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and then you work out at home Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday. Something like that could make sense. Or maybe you meet up with a friend for a hike on Saturdays or on Sundays, something like that. Just make sure that it's at least 20 minutes per day. That's the bottom threshold where you're going to be experiencing the benefits based on current research and the way I understand it. If you can't commit to that, just be okay with this taking about twice as long as it otherwise would. Again, not here to judge you, just here to give you advice, try to be as helpful as possible, try to be that friend who shoots straight with you, but in a supportive way. Give me feedback if I am blowing it on that, like for real. Um, if you want or need help with constructing an exercise routine, a web search can be helpful, or this is a great place to use some generative AI assistants or chatbots to help you make a sustainable plan. And getting help with this is totally acceptable. Like whatever you need to do to make this happen, highly recommend it. It's one of the biggest leverage points you can get on your study time. So I want to break up this episode so it doesn't become too overwhelming because I have a lot of additional advice that I can give. So I split it up in between those three things and then just like everything else as additional recommendations because honestly, those three things are the core of great full-time study. If you study in 2 hour blocks, you take at least a 1 hour break between blocks, and you exercise every day, you'll probably be like 80% optimized with your overall time management of full-time study, which should be enough for you to feel solid about the work that you're doing and the additional time you're putting in if you are studying full-time. Now, if you want to get to that 100% optimization level, here are a couple extras that will really help with that. But I want to be clear, none of these would supersede the top three. So, recommendation number 4, I highly recommend planning each day the night before. Most people studying full time end up thinking that because they have so much time, they don't need as much structure to get things done. And unfortunately, I've really found the opposite to be true. There are so many distractions these days. If you don't have a plan of what you're supposed to be focusing on right now, it's much more likely that 100 things are going to come up and like before you know it, sometimes you burned an hour or a whole session or maybe even a whole day doing a bunch of things that aren't studying. And for most of you, your study time is very precious, even if you are studying full time. And so you really want that to count and you want to prioritize well. Now, this is also a reason you can take those longer breaks. Like if you need to handle things, it can almost certainly wait for 2 hours. I would find it very unusual if you have that many urgent things happening on a regular basis. But if you do, obviously, you've got to prioritize. And let's be real, many things are more important than the GMAT, but many things are not. And if you don't have a plan, you might end up prioritizing things that aren't your true priority. And that can be a very frustrating place to be. So let's talk about this just a little bit more. Have you ever been to a business meeting without an agenda? How do those usually go? Honestly, how much time and effort would it have taken the leader of a meeting to make an agenda? And how much more productive would that meeting be as a result of that person just being like, okay, what do we need to cover? What are the main action items? Who are the key stakeholders? Who are the people who even need to be involved in this meeting in the first place? Just take 2 minutes at the end of every study day to plan out the next day. Okay. This is just making a quick agenda for your business meetings. You will thank yourself and everyone you work with for the rest of your career will thank you as well. Um, just to be clear, you don't even need to plan out what material you're going to cover during your study sessions. Just plan out when your 2 hour blocks are going to be, like when are you going to start, when are you going to end, when your breaks will be, and what you're going to do during your breaks. And that will free you up to make sure that you are as focused as possible during your actual 2 hour blocks of study time. That's it. So just the day before, when you end your study session, plan out when your 2 hour blocks are going to be for the next day, when your breaks are going to be, and what you're going to do during your breaks. This will allow you to make plans with other people as well, and it will keep you accountable to yourself rather than, oh, I've got all day. Let me just chill for another 2 hours. If you're studying full time, you really want to treat your studying like your job. If you're late, there's like serious negative consequences for that. That's how you want to be approaching this, in my experience. It might not feel good, and it might feel like you're being harder on yourself than you want to be, but in my experience, it's just totally, totally worth it. And you'll thank yourself at the end of the day, even if you were like fighting yourself a little bit at the beginning of the day, if that makes sense. Now, obviously, if you're the type of person who's way too hard on yourself and you have like serious issues with that, then please don't do this. Like none of this is medical advice, none of this is psychiatric advice. If you have serious problems, then please get serious help. But let's just assume you're a person in the middle of the bell curve when it comes to, physical, mental state, then I recommend being tough on yourself when it comes to being on time. If you don't create structure for your time, there's a 99% likelihood you're going to waste times on things that you'll regret later. And that's like a very negative relationship to have with yourself. And it's definitely not going to help your GMAT score. So let's just get two birds with one stone on that one. Think about it like not having a financial budget. How much unplanned money would you spend without any budget at all? Time is the same. Time is exactly the same. So when you're planning out the next day, the night before, it's like you're sketching out a budget for the next month so that you don't go over budget and you know what your limits are. If you don't have limits, there probably won't be any limits, and you'll probably blow all your time on whatever feels good in the moment. This is how most of us are hardwired, okay? I know some of you are discipline freaks, and that's cool too. But here I'm just talking to people who just might need to hear this. So that's recommendation number 4. Plan out your day the night before. You don't even need to plan out what you're going to study during each block. Just plan out when your 2 hour blocks are going to be, when your breaks are going to be, and what you're going to do during your breaks. Recommendation number 5, track your study time. Keep it super, super simple. Just log how many minutes you planned to put in versus how many you actually put in. This will help you adjust if you start to get off track. And usually, when you're studying full time, you don't have an accountability partner. And so you have to be like your own coach, your own leader. Now, obviously, if you have a professional coach, that's going to help a lot. But I know probably the vast majority of you listening to this are either just not going to engage with that because you don't need it or you don't want it, or you're not in a position to afford that, which is totally understandable. All of us, virtually all of us, let's say, have financial limitations or limitations of some kind. And so I'm going to try to help you as much as I can, assuming you would have to do this for free. But if you can afford to invest, like you have heard me say many, many times, that will probably be really helpful, assuming you do your diligence on your provider, which I would hope you would. But if you're considering hiring a provider without doing diligence, please don't do that. Please, please, please do not do that. You're making an investment, do diligence on your investment. So back to tracking study time. Again, just log how many minutes you plan to put in, how many minutes you actually put in. That's it. It's really easy to round up time spent on things that are difficult, and I recommend you keep a track of exactly what you did and how much time you invested in each task. And that way, if you start to drift, which can happen, then you'll be able to course correct much more quickly than you otherwise would if you weren't tracking. Like you don't want to get 3 days down the line and realize you've been drifting for 3 days. That's going to cost you many, many, many precious hours. If you're drifting, you want to know later that day, if that makes sense. Like, okay, I got to get back on top of this. All right. Promise that'll really, really help out. Again, just coming back to being the right amount of hard on yourself. I've talked about this in the past, but like you want to be that friend who's like never gonna BS you and who's never gonna let you off the hook or never gonna let you like BS yourself. Many of you probably have that friend. You might have to become that friend for yourself in these situations. And you want to be supportive, but you also want to be firm with yourself and be like, look, you were 5 minutes late today. This is really, really important to me. What do we need to do to be 5 minutes early for every other study session that we do? Like, let's map it out together. I'm on your team. I want to see you win. I don't want you to see you get 95% of your results here. I want you to want to see you get 100. All right. And again, this is just coming back to like how you can coach yourself through these things. You always want to believe that success is possible and remind yourself that you're capable of doing it. But you also want to remind yourself that if you don't put your best effort in, it's very, 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 very unlikely you're going to get your best result. Like that's just usually things don't work that way. Just reminding you. I know you know that, but just trying to be that good friend to you, if that makes sense, and to myself. So almost everyone gets off track or loses focus at some point, and that's why we want to track. We want to solve that problem before it happens. If you can get good at refocusing, you should be able to sustain difficult projects over the long haul, which is a superpower these days. It's actually very difficult and very rare that people can do this now. Many people have not developed this skill. And I just want to remind you, it is a skill. It's like whether you are born with it or not is irrelevant. If you work on it, you'll improve at it. Like that is a very simple mathematical equation there. If you work on sustaining difficult things over long periods, you will get better at sustaining difficult things over long periods. And if you can develop that skill, it'll definitely set you apart in a major way. Now, I know a lot of you listening to this don't need help with that, and you need the episode on like how to chill out and not like do it, overkill. I've got let's see. Back in the feed earlier this year, we did an episode on balance, and that's for all of you who are like the hardcore, um, people where like you kind of make people uncomfortable. I have no idea how that feels, by the way. And you know, you might need to to have a different type of balance in your life because you're not gonna experience balance the way a quote unquote normal person does, and that's cool. I don't either. But there is some kind of balance point that we need to strike, even if that balance point is radically different than the average person. And like that's cool. That's a beautiful thing. Like, people who like to get stuff done tend to get stuff done, and like getting stuff done is valuable. Like that helps pretty much everybody out most of the time. But you don't want to do it overkill. And then some of you are in the position where like you're just really having trouble sticking to the plan and getting things going. And then most of you are going to be somewhere in the middle. So you might want to listen to our episode on how to become more disciplined, which will be linked in the description of this content. And you also might want to listen to an episode called How to Score High Consistently, which is really an episode about how to just become more consistent in general. So if that's you and you need help with that or want help with that, those are there for you. If you're got it turned up to 11.9 100% of the time and you're overcooking everybody around you and yourself, then you might enjoy the balance episode. Okay. So sorry if I drifted off topic there. I guess that's very topical. So staying focused, in my experience and my opinion, is really just about being good at refocusing. Like the attention and the focus and the motivation is going to drift at some point. And if you can build the skill of redialing that in quickly, then from the outside, it appears that you never drift. And you'll get the kind of results that people who are focused for long periods of time on hard things get, which I gotta say have been good in my experience. Let's just put it that way. So just track what you planned, track what you actually did. That'll really help you see when you're falling short and when you're actually keeping your commitments with yourself, which also is a really, really beautiful thing. That's recommendation number 5. Track your study time. Recommendation number 6 is a repeat recommendation of some things I've made in the past, which is to track your sleep, diet, and exercise. Again, this is just bonus material. You don't have to do any of this if you're studying full time, as long as you hit the 2 hours on, at least 1 hour off, and you make exercise non-negotiable. Those top 3, you'll be good. But if you want this kind of like next level of performance, then track your sleep, diet, and exercise. Just have a record of what you did that day, how many minutes you spent on it. Keep it super simple. If you want to track in a more advanced way with some really cool tech, by all means, that's great too. But you don't have to do that. If you track these things, they will steadily improve over time. If you want to be at 100% of your capacity, getting the best sleep, diet, and exercise that you possibly can every day is going to be essential. Again, you don't need to be a pro athlete here. You definitely don't need perfection. You don't want to become like overly focused on it and neurotic about it. You just want to focus on what works for you, and you want to keep improving over time. And because I've just talked about this so much in past episodes, I'm just going to move on. Recommendation number 7, and I think where I'm going to just leave this for now, is don't delete your social life. I know that that is super like appealing of an idea for some of you, and I really don't recommend doing that. For others of you, you're like, oh, sweet relief. I don't have to like give up talking to other humans for just to study full time. But just here's my advice on this. Do something social at least once a week. I recommend making some plans on like a Friday night or Saturday or Sunday night, something like that. You can absolutely still get in 4 2-hour blocks with at least an hour break between them before 7 p.m., which leaves you plenty of time to go do other things with other humans in the evening. If you start earlier, obviously you can end earlier. Um, you don't have to do that. I'm just saying that would be like quote unquote typical full-time hours. And of course, you're welcome to do more if you want to do 5 2-hour blocks or 6 2-hour blocks. Like people are doing it. I'm just saying it's been done before. You don't have to do that. It's really just about how fast you want this to happen. But even if you're doing that 6 days out of the week, please just block out one time once a week to just talk to some other humans and hang out. Okay. The more high quality social time you get in, the easier it'll be to sustain your full time study. Now, if you're introverted, that's cool. Just do something once per week. Keep it minimal, but I wouldn't recommend just isolating yourself completely. If you're extroverted, maybe you make plans every night. The point is to make sure that you have your time structured in a way that supports you being able to sustain this commitment for long enough to outcompete lots of other really talented, really hardworking people. It's totally doable. You can do it. It just takes a bit of planning and a bit of reminding yourself how much you want this. Okay. If you struggle with discipline and execution, again, just check out the discipline and consistency episodes that are also linked below. Now, I did promise that I would talk to you about what to do during your 2-hour blocks, but I'm going to keep this really, really brief because I don't want to dilute the focus of this episode. And I have an entire episode on how to structure your study time, and it is called How to Structure Your GMAT Study Time. And that will also be linked in the description of this content if you want to click on that rather than searching manually for it. But I think it's from January of 2024 if you prefer to search manually. But just so I'm not like doing some clickbaitiness there or something of like saying I'm going to talk about it and then pushing you to another episode. The super basics of how to structure your study time is the first 20% of your time should go to review. That could be concepts like flashcards and facts that you're trying to remember or memorize. It could be previous problems that you want to stay fresh on or that involve an important concept that you want to understand better. And it could be anything that you know needs more work. If you want a super simple recommendation, I would do some flashcards and some questions you've already done in the past, which I call the redo list. And I would do that for that first 20% of each study session. And then the next 80% should be new material. And if you want a super simple structure, just do that. If you want something super in depth, that's a lot more specific, then check out that episode called How to Structure Your GMAT Study Time. And I'll go long on that. If you have questions about this, if you're not sure how this applies to your specific situation, then feel free to touch base with us anytime. You can find us at the GMAT Strategy on current social channels, or you can email us contact@thegmatstrategy.com, contact@thegmatstrategy.com. As always, my greatest hope is that this material will make your studies as easy and as painless as they can possibly be. If you want more tips and strategies for optimizing your performance on the exam, please head to our website, thegmatstrategy.com, which is linked in the description of this content, and check out our free video on how you can reach your dream GMAT score in half the normal time. I know that might sound crazy, but it's totally achievable if you follow the advice that is in that video. I do want to be clear, if I give you advice and you don't take it, I will not take responsibility for those results. In the meantime, this is a regular show, so please subscribe and please stay positive and stay consistent with your studies. I'll talk to you all soon.